Welcome to the ACEIT podcast, where we turn science into sense. As we begin our 11th season, I wanted to let you know that JCOIN has a new O. That's right. The formerly Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network is now the Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network. Same wonderful network, same awesome podcast, but with a broader emphasis. So I am so excited that you're with us. I'm Danielle Rudes, your host, and this is ACEIT. Welcome to episode 4 of season 11 of the ACEIT podcast. On today's episode of our season on substance use disorder, overdose, and loved ones, we're talking about siblings' experiences. That is, people's experiences of being a sibling to someone with a substance use disorder, or SUD, or an overdose incident. First, we'll talk about people's experiences navigating their siblings' substance use issues and life after their overdose. Next, we'll talk about the impact of drug overdose bereavement on siblings' emotional, physical, and social well-being. There's a lot of research out there on these topics, so let's get right to it. All right, let's start with navigating sibling substance abuse. In her study of 21 siblings bereaved by drug overdose, Perrin's 2023 interviewees described the trauma of watching their siblings abuse drugs. For example, one of her interviewees, Karen, said her brother had, quote, been using heroin on and off probably since his early 20s. She remembers when she was about 14 or 15 years old, walking in on him shooting up in the bathroom. She also recalled a story of him nodding off while driving and nearly running up the back of a car, unquote. However, even amidst these challenges, people view their siblings who struggle with substance abuse as so much more than addicts. For instance, the same Perrin study participant I just mentioned said, quote, there's something intrinsic in your relationship, that there's a closeness, that nobody understands you better than your siblings, unquote. In another study, Mean and Colleagues 2024 interviewed 14 siblings and found that while most participants described their siblings as addicts, they also recognized them beyond their addiction. Moreover, in a different study using the same data, Mean and Colleagues, also in 2024, found that siblings connected their siblings' drug use to trauma in their youth. In this way, these siblings recognized substance use as not a failure of their sibling, but a reaction to the adversity they experienced while growing up. Finally, siblings sometimes view death from overdose as an expected outcome of substance misuse. That also comes from Mean in 2024, and also often grieve their siblings before the sibling even overdoses to begin with. For instance, Ingrid, one of the interviewees in Mean and Colleagues' 2024 qualitative study, recalled, quote, you've had so many of the stages of grief before the overdose, with denial and then anger and sadness and despair and a feeling of powerlessness because you can't do anything, unquote. Now, looking at navigating life after a sibling has died of a drug overdose, Perrin, 2022, the study I mentioned earlier, asked her interviewees questions about learning about their sibling's death, the aftermath, and the grief. When recalling when they learned about their sibling's death, interviewees had both fuzzy or out-of-body experiences, while some could recall in minute detail the situation. Some also recalled the trauma of having to tell their parents that their sibling had died, since they were either the first one to find out or the one who found their sibling after the overdose. Some siblings wanted to know all the details of the medical report to understand what exactly contributed to their sibling's death, and others recalled rather insensitive experiences with practitioners and institutions. For instance, one interviewee remarked about crying on a plane and not being offered a tissue, and the other was shocked and saddened when the doctor referred to their sibling as a vegetable when they were on life support following the overdose. These conversations shed light on the sibling experiences post-overdose. Next, Perrin describes the many rituals surrounding the siblings' deaths. Many siblings were heavily involved and sometimes even led memorial arrangements or viewed or identified their siblings' bodies when parents could not bring themselves to attend. They also often handled cleaning their siblings' room or apartment. Throughout all of this, siblings voiced that they had viewed their parents' grief as stronger or more intense than their own. This finding was supported in a different study conducted by Mean and colleagues 2024. Finally, participants described facing a lot of social stigma surrounding their sibling's death, often not knowing how much to disclose about the death or what to tell people at funerals and other events. For instance, one of Parent's 2023 interviewees, Karen, recalled, quote, "One of her mother's best friends visited and asked Karen how her brother died, to which Karen responded, he died of a drug overdose. She became aware, all of a sudden, that Mom was in the other end of the corridor, and the look on her face, they were telling their friends that he died in a car accident. Karen had no idea that this was what they were saying. She says this was about the shame of it. Their son was using drugs." Okay, now let's talk about the impact of drug overdose bereavement on siblings' emotional and social well-being. Emotionally, bereaved siblings experience increased emotional stress. That comes from an article by Brennan in 2020. They also might feel a lot of guilt or regret about how they reacted to their siblings' substance misuse. Those findings from both Brennan 2020 and Perrin 2022. In some instances, people might feel such immense sadness after their sibling's death that they want to die themselves. That comes from Perrin 2022. Finally, bereaved siblings face a lot of uncertainty, like not knowing how to move on with quote-unquote normal life, feeling unsafe because their quote-unquote safe person, their sibling, has died, or like there is a gaping hole in their family. Socially, Perrin's 2022 study reported feeling physical pain after their sibling's death. Through surveys and interviews with bereaved siblings, Brennan 2020 and Mean and his colleagues 2024 capture how this reduced functioning negatively impacts people's school and work life. Interestingly, Brennan 2020 found that individuals who had siblings of the same gender experienced higher levels of negative symptoms than those who had siblings of the opposite gender. From all of this research, we can see the far-reaching impacts of a drug overdose on surviving siblings. So, we've reached the end of the discussion for today on siblings' experiences with substance use misuse and overdose. I hope you learned something new today, and if you have experienced the loss of a sibling, I hope that these stories show you that you are not alone. I'll talk to you on the next episode, where we'll begin talking about intimate partners' experiences. As a reminder, if after listening to this episode, you need support, please contact the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Thank you for listening to the Aced It podcast. We love hearing from you. So if you have comments, topics to suggest, or some science you'd like us to cover in a future season, please write to me, Danielle Rudes, at Sam Houston State University in Texas. My email is drudes, D-R-U-D-E-S, at shsu.edu. And of course, thank you to the Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network, JCOIN's Coordination and Translation Center, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, housed at George Mason University, where this podcast originated. Thank you to our fabulous scriptwriter and also my fantastic doctoral student, Bryce Kushmerek McCune. And a huge and heartfelt thank you to the team at Slonky LLC for their wonderful podcast production, as always. Tune in again for another episode of Aced It.